As many of you may already know, Kirby is one of my favorite Nintendo series, and today I wanted to take a look at the Kirby entries on the original Game Boy, the system that first launched Kirby. Kirby was pretty popular when he did come out, so he does have a lot of mainline and spin-off games for the original Game Boy specifically. So we're going to be taking a look at all of them, the original Game Boy. My faceplate! Shoot!
Today's video was filmed by utilizing the Super Game Boy. Many of the Kirby games on the Game Boy have special borders, color palettes, and even upgraded sounds on the Super Game Boy, and I loved this accessory as a kid, so I had to take a look. I also have the original box from when I had this, and it's, seen better days. First up is the original that started it all, Kirby's Dream Land. A lot of people may not know that Kirby's first game actually didn't have any of the signature copy abilities. We wouldn't see that until his second game, Kirby's Adventure on the NES. Key defining features are still present in this first game, however. Kirby's core platforming and flying mechanics feel simple and smooth. He still sucks and spits out enemies to make his way through 4 levels and then a boss gauntlet before facing King Dedede. While small enemies can just be sucked up, you have to rely on boss attacks for the opportunity to suck up stars or items that they make to defeat them. A lot of the classic enemies debut in this one too, like Sir Kibble, Waddle Dees and Doos, and classic bosses like Wispy Woods and Krakow. The final boss fight with King Dedede has him throw out a bunch of different moves at random, which sometimes can be really frustrating just waiting for him to pull out his hammer, but it really fits his character. The game's story is pretty much that King Dedede has stolen a bunch of food and it's up to Kirby to get all the food back for the inhabitants of Dreamland. This game is pretty short playthrough, but it does have a lot of secrets and a good level of gameplay variety for a Game Boy game. There's a lot of charm in the character designs and level designs, and it debuts some of my favorite Kirby music tracks that are still in the series today. HAL Laboratories may have been limited with this title, but they really knocked it out of the park with a solid platformer that should be in everyone's Game Boy collection. The price of Dreamland 1 has risen steadily over the years for the cartridge, but it is a pretty common title, and it is available on other consoles too, much like the Kirby's Dream Collection on the Wii, which some of these titles we'll see today are featured on. Next up was the release of Kirby's Pinball Land. This released in 1993 and is actually the third Kirby game overall, which is pretty neat. Pinball games must have been much more popular in the 80s and 90s because there's a good handful of games that got pinball spin-offs, and one could argue this started the Kirby spin-off train that we see today. I don't really like pinball games, so I don't have much to say on this one besides, hey, it's pinball with a Kirby skin. Granted, the Kirby world has a lot of good variety and enemy design to make the game's 3 boards stand out, each with their own unique goals and bosses, but the worst part of this game is probably its limitation on the hardware. The boards are multiple screens long, and it gets really jarring moving from one screen to the next. It also feels really easy to lose or getting into situations where your ball just falls straight down past your paddles, but I think that's more of an issue in the game overall of pinball itself. I think if you really like pinball games, there are loads of other ones that you can play that feel better. Pinball Land is pretty cheap for a decent Game Boy game these days, but I think you're better off playing any of the other games in this video. Next released was Kirby's Dream Land 2, the sequel to the Game Boy original. This one takes a ton of inspiration from both the previous title, Kirby's Adventure, while presenting some new ideas. Levels are spread out in a world map view just like in Adventure. Here, Kirby is now joined by some animal companions that he can ride, and the fun part, can manipulate the copy abilities that he has. Kirby is joined by those animal companions. He has Rick the hamster, Coo the owl, and Kine the fish, as you navigate through 7 different worlds, each with multiple levels inside. Dreamland 2 only has 7 copy abilities available, but depending on if you are on an animal companion, it changes the way that the ability works. This is basically Kirby's Adventure toned down a bit for the handheld experience. I love this game's soundtrack and even greater variety of levels and gameplay here. Dreamland 2 also has some unique bosses that add to the fun and challenge. Of course, if you've played Adventure, you may not be as impressed, but I think this makes it a much more solid platformer for the Game Boy, and definitely a must-have, even more so than the first Dreamland. Cartridges for Dreamland 2 have climbed up in price a bit over the last few years, but much like its predecessor, it can be played on Kirby's Dream Collection on the Wii. Out of all the Game Boy titles, Dreamland 2 is the biggest and best one they get for sure. Next up was Kirby's Block Ball. Kirby's Block Ball may seem like a simple Breakout clone at first, but it's a little bit more than that. There are 10 worlds each with 4 levels and then a boss fight, as you basically, play Breakout. But hold on, the Kirby twist on this game is what gets you hooked. As you progress, Kirby can utilize copy abilities to make his ball form self do crazy things, like Rock Kirby to slam down on a line of blocks, or Spark Kirby to clear an area, or the Fire, which makes him charge in a direction, and also Needle Kirby, which helps you stick back to a paddle to re-aim a shot. Some stages even grant you items like multiple balls or paddles on all 4 sides of the screen for even more crazy gameplay. I was surprised with how mentally stimulating some of these later stages are. You can also find pickups for bonus points and play minigames that get you more lives. I think the beauty of this game for me is that unlike Pinball Land, Block Ball makes the Kirby aspect feel more like features that enhance core gameplay instead of just using the Kirby look to paint over the bland gameplay of something like Pinball. It's a very unique twist and probably the most unique version of a quote-unquote breakout clone that I've ever seen before. Block Ball is also slowly rising in price in recent years, so if you're interested, I'd pick it up while you still can. The last Game Boy game for Kirby was Kirby's Star Stacker, released in 1997. This is the only one on the list that I hadn't played before, and I shouldn't have been surprised to see that it was just a Puyo Puyo clone. There are a few modes here, like an Endless mode and a Versus mode, which is only available by linking up 2 Game Boys. Neat. I played the round mode of this game, and the difficulties here look ridiculous by name, but man, some of them really do get fast and hard. I'm not the best at Puyo Puyo, but it really put a run for my money here. This is also like Pinball Land in that the Kirby aspects don't really bleed into gameplay, and it's just used as a stylistic choice, which isn't always bad, and here the game runs fine. But I honestly wouldn't really recommend it when there are other Puyo Puyo games that you can play that are more accessible. Heck, you could even get Kirby's Avalanche on the Super Nintendo if you wanted more gameplay like this. This one actually did receive a remake on Super Famicom, which was planned for a US release, but it was planned too late as Nintendo of America didn't want to ship out any new Super Nintendo games when the N64 was already starting to get in full swing. Like Kirby's Block Ball, this one is also slowly rising in price, so if you want it, you should get it while you can. It's not really a must-have, but you can have some fun with it if you really want Puyo Puyo on the go. Out of the 5 Game Boy release games for Kirby, I'd say that these 3 here are probably the ones that are worth your time. And the other 2, well, they aren't really unique and a bit bland on their own, to be honest. Maybe if you are really into their style of game you can get them, but that's for you to decide.
And there you have it, that's every Kirby game for the original Game Boy. Some of these lesser known titles I think are definitely worth it for any Game Boy collection, and you should seek them out before they get a little bit more expensive than what they are now. But what did you think? Let me know which of the Kirby games looks the best to you in the comments below, and until next time, take care.